Python data types, experiment 2. Here we are going to discuss about integer again. In the earlier video, we already discussed about integer. In this video, specifically, we are going to discuss about the number systems, how Python is going to deal with number systems. So let's quickly get into a demonstration. If you look at this particular definitions for the number systems, I have splitted them into multiple types of number systems. If you look at the integer family's number systems, the first one comes on the top is decimal. I believe you all know what decimal numbers would look like. It's the normal numbers that we use in a day-to-day life is all about the decimals. So it's set as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and it goes on. So that's the normal decimal numbers. But how do we deal with binary? You can see the binary representation as well. So usually we start with zeros and ones, and you will have a combination of zeros and ones in order to represent the number in binary. The same way we have octal numbers as well, octal digits or octal numbers, and the octal number representations are denoted here. And you also have a hexadecimal representation of numbers, and all these are coming under the family of integer. And the Python will deal with these types of number systems by using some prefixing tools. So how the prefixing tools will be used in Python code is what we are going to explore in this particular video. So let's quickly get into some small demos which would help you to understand how these interpretation of number systems works in Python. So let's start with decimal. If in case I'm going to assign a decimal number to a variable in Python, we are going to use a casual digit like this. So let's say 10. So this 10 is represented as a decimal right now. And if you print them, you get the decimal number. That's fine. So this is treated as a decimal. But how about a binary? How we are going to represent binary? Let's take another variable here. This variable is going to be assigned with a binary style of representation. In Python, the binary style of representation will be done by prefixing with 0 and followed with a character called B. That B denotes that it's a binary representation, and I'm going to carry the same value called 10 to it, like how we used it for decimal. The same way here it is for the binary as well. Now if I try to print this variable y, you should notice that it's not the same as the value that you got for the decimal x variable. It's going to be slightly different. Here it represents 2. I believe you can interpret that how this binary works. The value that we have here is represented as 10, but how this binary tool is going to interpret this as is you will have a binary notation saying the validation happens from 0 and then goes to 1. So we state this as 1, 2. The number 1 is on the position of 2, and it goes on 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256. So it goes on. So that's how the calculation happens. You can have multiple variations of these binary numbers. Let's say, for example, what's going to happen if I say 001. The moment we represent 001 with the binary tool notation, it's going to print this as 4. So 1, 2 and 4. What if in case if I'm going to have another 0 here? So it's going to represent as 8. And if I'm going to have a combination of 101, then in that case it's going to be 10, because you have 1, 2, the 1 position is pointing to 2, and then you again have a 0, then you have another 1 pointing to a position of 8. So 8 and 2, it comes to 10. So this is how we basically work with binary. I believe you all would have worked on it. But the idea here is Python will interpret the binary with prefixing with 0 and B as a prefixing tool for representing them as a binary. That's great. So what about octal numbers? how we are going to work with octal numbers. Let's see that. If you are going to represent an octal number for the same 10, we are going to use a prefixing tool for that as well. And this time we are going to use a notation called 0 and O for it. So let's declare a variable called Z, and let's go ahead and use a prefixing notation called 0 and followed with O, and then you can represent the number 10. By this way, this will be denoted as an octal number. If you try to print them, it gets you the output of 8. So how this interpretation works, probably you can just go and catch up from the number system evaluations, so that you will get to know how this number alignments happens when it comes to the octal representation. But the notation that I'm using here as a prefixing for this number is 0 and O. So always you will see for all the patterns of the binary, the octal and the hexadecimals, you will be using the prefixing of 0 followed with the specific character. And B is all about binary and O is all about octal. And now we are going to use X for representing hexadecimal. So let's quickly get on to the learning of hexadecimal. So let's declare a variable called E, and I'm going to use the prefixing tool called 0 and X, and then followed with the value of 10. And now this E is representing hexadecimal value. So let's print this E variable and see what's the output for this. It's 16. 8 is for octal and 16 is for hexa. So this is how Python interprets your number system representations. B is all about binary, O is all about octal, and X is all about hexadecimal. But if you look at the decimal, okay, I just give 0, 1, 0. The moment I say 0 here, if I enter, it ends up with an error. That's a syntactical error. Leading zeros in decimal integer literals are not permitted by the Python interpreter. Python interpreter is actually interpreting this code, and a decimal which is led by a 0 is not permissible. Okay, but you can represent them by using the notation as B or O for octal or X for hexadecimal. That's fine. But for a pure decimal numbers, you're not supposed to do any prefixing of 0 there. Or let's say, since it's a decimal, I'm just trying to use this as 0 and D. In that case, again, you will get an invalid syntax. The reason you're getting an invalid syntax, it's because we don't have any specific notation to represent decimal by saying 0D. You casually throw the number to a variable, and by default, that's treated as a decimal number family or number family. So Python represents all variants of number systems, which includes your decimal, binary, octal, hexadecimal. Binary, a casual number, which will be by default treated as decimal by the interpreter. You need not represent by any specific notation for that. But when it comes to the binary, you have to prefix that number with 0 and B. And when it comes to the octal, you have to use 0 and O. And when it comes to the hexadecimal, it is 0 and X.